Hi guys, how you doing? If you're a long time subscriber of the channel, or if you're one of those people that subscribes to a channel and goes through the, looks through the list of videos that have been uploaded, you will probably be aware that in February of this year, 2019, I was arrested for attempting to take some stock footage of emergency vehicles leaving a police station here in Merseyside. Now, I was arrested. I was forcibly removed from the site in handcuffs and taken to a custody suite where I was put in a cell for several hours before being released because I refused to give my name under section 50 of the Police Reform Act, which states that if you are believed to be committing a public order offence, for example, alarm, harassment and distress to somebody, then under section 50 of the Police Reform Act, the police can oblige you to give your details. Well, I refused. In fact, I didn't refuse. That's a lie, so I apologise. That's a lie. I refused to give my details up to the point that they said about section 50. I carried a folder with me with some legislation in because I know how sometimes photographers can be approached by the police. So I carry some legislation around with me when I do my photography, and it helps me to make sure that I'm staying within the law. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop the police from acting outside of the law, but that's another story altogether. Yes, so I was arrested. Since then, my solicitor put in a complaint, which was done several months ago. The time for the complaint to be dealt with is in about a week, is the end time frame that the complaint should have been dealt with. But we have actually received a response about my complaint. Now this is quite a long letter, it's 12 pages long. I'm going to read it through. I'm going to show you the letter on screen, and I'm going to read through it as well. So if you want to carry on with what you're doing, you'll have the audio of me reading it out to you if you haven't got the time to sit here and actually watch it. But I'm not going to give you any of my responses. I have written a response to this, and my response is about 5 or 6 pages long. That's gone to my solicitor for him to deal with and write out in a way that can be submitted back to the Chief Constable, because a PSD complaint, once it's been upheld or not, can only be can only be argued against by sending to the Chief Constable. So that's been done. There are a lot of things in this that worry me. A lot of things in this response from the police professional standards department. A lot of things. And I've already, as I say, written my reply to this, which is about 5 or 6 pages long. However, I'm going to ask you, if you have watched those 4 videos, and I'm going to put the links in the description below, and that there is video number 1. That's not clickable, by the way. That's just there to show you as you're searching through the videos to find it. But video 2, there's 4 videos. Video 1 is quite a long interaction with the police officer, which resulted in him saying that he'd spoken to his superior and he was going to leave me be. Ultimately suggesting that what I was doing was absolutely fine. Video 2, nothing happens really in video 2. Video 3 and video 4. So, there is where I am approached, surrounded by 8 police officers, and then ultimately arrested. So yeah, so I'm going to crack on with this. I'm not going to, as I say, give any response to any of this, what's in here. If you have seen the video already, you'll, if you can remember it, what had happened, then, by all means, feel free to, let me know in the comments your thoughts on this letter. I would very much appreciate, and I'd like to know your thoughts. And obviously I will converse with you in the comments, but again, I'm not going to be able to tell you at the moment what my responses are, or whether I agree with your response or not with regards to this letter, based on what you've seen in video evidence that I uploaded to the channel. I don't want to give the police the opportunity to see my response before it's sent to them, because, you know, it just gives them time to then concoct and conspire against what I'm saying. So I'm going to get cracking, and yeah, this is going to be interesting. So here we go. So you can see it's from Merseyside Police. And the first page just literally says, in reference to your client, I refer to your client's complaint made about the conduct of members of Merseyside Police. I am now writing to you as the investigation has been completed. Constable Keith investigated your client's complaint. During this time, evidence has been gathered and those subject of the complaint have been asked to respond. I have reviewed the case to ensure that this complaint has been properly investigated. The majority of cases, if proven, are dealt with by way of managerial action. It should be noted that we always aim to learn from any complaints made, so regardless of whether matters are proven or not, the force can and do take action to monitor and review officers' performance as well as our processes and policies. Your complaint. Please find enclosed a comprehensive report from the investigating officer outlining his findings in relation to your client's complaint. I have carefully examined the issues that you have raised. After reviewing all the material, I have not upheld this complaint. I recognise that your client may be dissatisfied with this outcome. However, the investigating officer has provided me with a detailed report that has enabled me to make the decision based on the known facts. I am satisfied that no crime has been committed by any officer, and therefore I have not referred the matter to the Crown Prosecution Service. Your client has a right of appeal to the Chief Constable against the handling of this complaint. In order to make an appeal, your client should visit the complaint section of the Merseyside Police website. And that's from Detective Superintendent I Hassel. Yes, you all hassle the public. Anyway, should your client not have access to the internet, he should telephone this number and the appeal documents will be sent to him or his representatives and should be submitted via the address below. Please note that your client should make this request at the earliest opportunity to allow time for the appeal to be received within the specified timescales, as appeals submitted after the cut-off date may not be considered. We must receive your client's appeal within 29 days of the date of this letter, including the time your client's appeal spends in the post. Complainant is Mr. Ian Gould of DPP Law, acting on behalf of myself. The allegations: unlawful, unnecessary arrest or detention. Mr. Elliott believes that his arrest for a breach of Section 50 of the Police Reform Act on 20th of February 2019 was unlawful, recorded against Constable 5580 Hunt. Other assault. Mr. Elliott believes that he was subjected to excessive, unnecessary and disproportionate force, specifically the application of handcuffs, recorded against Constable Hunt and Constable 6621 Williams. Background to the complaint. On the 20th of February 2019, Mr. Elliott was outside Crosby Police Station filming on his mobile telephone. He was observed taking photographs of police officers and staff in both their private and police vehicles. Mr. Elliott was approached by officers and explains that he was taking stock footage. Mr. Elliott was approached by officers and explained that he was taking stock photographs to use on his website or for selling or giving away. Mr. Elliott was asked to provide his details and he refused to do so after several requests. He was advised of the consequences of not providing the required information, and having failed to do so was arrested for a breach of Section 50 Police Reform Act, as he was causing annoyance to the officers who were trying to leave the building in their own private vehicles. Mr. Elliott was released from custody under investigation. A decision was made that no further action would be taken, and following this decision to no further action in the matter, Mr. Elliott made a complaint regarding his arrest via his solicitors. Investigation inquiry is undertaken. An investigation into this complaint has been conducted by Constable 5968 Keith, Merseyside Police Professional Standards Department. The complaint has been assessed as suitable for local investigation with a right of appeal to the IOPC. The complaint has been continually assessed by the investigating officer for any matters amounting to misconduct or criminality, and no change to the assessment has been deemed necessary. A report has been obtained from the following officers: Constable Hunt, Constable Williams, Constable 1659 Thompson, Inspector 4015 Higham, and Sergeant 1770 Green. The following additional material has been reviewed: police log, MG11 Constable 4435 Gibson, MG11 Constable 1768 Barker. An MG11, by the way guys, is a witness statement form. That's what the MG11 is. YouTube footage uploaded by complainant, body worn video ×4, Section 50 of the Police Reform Act 2002, Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014, and the custody record. Conclusion. Unlawful, unnecessary arrest or detention. Mr. Elliott believes that his arrest for breach of Section 50 of the Police Reform Act on the 20th of February 2019 was unlawful. Constable Hunt explained that he drove into Crosby Police Station and noticed Mr. Elliott sitting outside the entrance on the partition wall. The officer said he thought this odd as he did not recognise the male. Constable Hunt said that he spoke to several members of staff and other officers inside the station, and it became apparent that Mr. Elliott had been there for some time and had been filming police vehicles and private vehicles alike, which was causing some alarm and distress to officers and staff within the building. The officer mentioned that these staff were concerned that their personal registration marks may be passed on to criminal elements in society. The officer said that such was the alarm caused that another gate was opened to the police station to allow ingress and egress from the car park without having to pass Mr. Elliott. Ingress and egress is entry and exit. Constable Hunt said that he was asked to speak to Mr. Elliott and establish his purpose. The officer said he was accompanied by Constable Thompson and activated his body-worn video as they tried to engage in conversation with Mr. Elliott. The officer said that Mr. Elliott explained that he was a public photographer who wanted stock photographs. The officer said that he explained to Mr. Elliott that his actions were causing alarm and distress to personnel coming and going from the building, and mentioned that Mr. Elliott refused to accept this. Constable Hunt said that he explained and tried to reason with Mr. Elliott that they did not know who he was and, for example, may have been affiliated with terrorism and or have criminal affiliations. The officer said that Mr. Elliott disregarded this and was talking over him. Constable Hunt said that he was joined by Constable Williams and Sergeant Green, who both tried to reason with Mr. Elliott and explain why he was causing alarm and distress. The officer said that he asked Mr. Elliott if there was any way he could facilitate his need for stock photographs. Hunt said that as he was causing alarm and distress, Mr. Elliott was asked to provide his name and address under Section 50 of the Police Reform Act. The officer said that Mr. Elliott refused on several occasions, despite officers present attempting to persuade, advise and warn him of the consequences of failing to do so. Just a quick note here, I didn't refuse. Once they mentioned Section 50, I already knew what Section 50 meant, but I didn't believe that it was proportionate for what was happening. So that's why I was trying to look through my booklet of legislations, my booklet of different laws and acts, to make sure that they were, acting legally, and that by, legal right, I had to obey that order. So as soon as they said Section 50, I never once said after that I refused to give any details. I didn't. If you have a look back into video 4, which is where they mention the Section 50, is about 5 minutes long. So they mention Section 50 of the Police Reform Act. I'm questioning officers at that point. I did not refuse to give my details at that point. I was simply questioning officers and making sure that I had a legal obligation to do so. Constable Hunt said that due to Mr. Elliott's continued refusal to provide his details, he was arrested. Constable Williams said that he was made aware that Mr. Elliott was outside the police station recording police officers and vehicles as they came and went from the station. The officer said that he was made aware that Mr. Elliott had been approached by a colleague and he had refused his details. Williams mentions that officers who were coming on duty and going off duty were reporting a concern about being harassed, alarmed and distressed by Mr. Elliott's presence due to being filmed on camera with their personal vehicles and registration numbers recorded. Constable Williams said that this led to a number of officers being worried about what could happen with the information recorded, resulting in them refusing to get into their vehicles to leave. The officer explains that the emergency gate was open to let officers come and go. Williams said that Constable Hunt and Constable Thompson went to speak to Mr. Elliott to try and ascertain his reasons for being there and to ask for his name and address. The officer mentioned that there was a high risk of terrorism within the UK, and he was worried why Mr. Elliott was present and recording a private car park of a police station. The officer added that colleagues had previously been followed home, which was also a concern. Williams said that he later went to join his colleagues and activated his body-worn video. The officer noted Mr. Elliott refused to give his details and record the officers on his mobile phone. Williams said that Mr. Elliott had documents relating to filming in public and information regarding certain areas of law. The officer said that he spoke to Mr. Elliott about his purpose and asked for his name and address. Williams said that they were joined by Sergeant Green and Inspector Higham, who informed Mr. Elliott that under Section 50 of the Police Reform Act he was required by law to furnish his details and if he did not, he would be arrested. The officer said that Constable Hunt also pointed out the offence and stated that by his presence, he was causing harassment, alarm and distress. Williams said that Mr. Elliott refused to provide his details and was arrested. Constable Thompson explains that she was approached by a female officer who did not want to leave the police station via the main gate as she was concerned about her private vehicle registration being recorded. Constable Thompson said she was aware that Inspector Higham had opened the emergency exit to allow staff to leave. Thompson said that she had attempted to remonstrate with Mr. Elliott, who had numerous opportunities to provide his personal details. So what, guys, the more I go through this, I've been through this about 5 or 6 times, but every single time I go through this, something else jumps out at me that I've forgotten, which I need now to add to my response to this pathetic excuse of an investigation. Right, carrying on. Inspector Higham said that he was made aware of the incident from staff about an hour before his involvement and was later made aware that Mr. Elliott had been acting strangely while filming colleagues in their own private cars, which had been parked in the police station car park. The officer said that he was made aware that Constable Barker had felt so concerned and anxious about his mannerism and filming that she had returned to the police yard to ask for the assistance of uniformed colleagues to go and speak to him. Very quickly, it's very important to note this bit, right? Constable Barker says that she was so concerned and anxious that she had to go back into the police yard and request some assistance. In a few minutes, you're going to hear how Constable Barker spent 10 years in Special Branch. 10 years in Special Branch dealing with terrorists, etc. Okay, but yet she was so alarmed by one person standing on public property in full view of everybody and the police yard cameras that she shit her pants and had to go back inside. Yeah, okay then. Inspector Higham said that he went outside and spoke with Barker, and due to the oddity and nature of Mr. Elliott and what he was doing, he researched possible offences from the police intranet. The officer said that from this he was of the opinion that Mr. Elliott had committed an offence under Section 50 of the Police Reform Act. Inspector Higham said that he went outside and joined Sergeant Green and other officers and explained what he believed to be the correct offence. Okay, there's something else there that's just jumped out at me. Now I'm lost. The correct offence, which is when the officers then asked Mr. Elliott for his details. Inspector Higham said he observed Mr. Elliott being asked several times to provide his details, which he declined to do. Inspector Higham recalled Mr. Elliott referring to a booklet containing documents and legislation and mentions that Mr. Elliott was clearly knowledgeable in certain aspects of law and had taken time to research these, as I suggest everybody does. Inspector Higham said that he did witness the arrest, but only as he was walking away from the car park entrance. Sergeant Green said that he was approached by staff complaining about Mr. Elliott filming outside. The officer said that no one was bothered about coming and going in police vehicles, but as it was changeover, end of shift, beginning of another, officers didn't want to drive past Mr. Elliott in their private vehicles for him to post online. Sergeant Green said that a decision was made to open emergency gates to allow egress from the station. Sergeant Green said that he was then informed that 2 officers had complained about Mr. Elliott filming, and so he went outside. Sergeant Green said that Mr. Elliott was well versed in the law and had a folder with legislation within. The officer noted that Mr. Elliott was argumentative and was refusing to listen. The officer said that in his mind Mr. Elliott was looking for a confrontation. Sergeant Green said that Mr. Elliott was warned numerous times to provide his details, and as he failed to do so, he was arrested. Constable Gibson completed an evidential statement regarding this incident and said that he and Constable Barker were making their way to the car park just outside the main entrance where both cars were parked. I'm glad it says here that this was an evidential statement, because as an evidential statement, any lies are going to be, that are found within the statements is a serious offence, very serious offence. So I'm glad that this was an evidential statement and not just a quiet little chat. The officer said that as they reached the vehicles and started to enter them, he noticed a male stood with what appeared to be a small tripod balanced on a boundary wall of an item with a light shining from it, facing the electric gates into the police station. Constable Gibson said that his colleague approached Mr. Elliott and asked him what he was doing. The officer said, "I've just found something else that's just jumped out at me." Wow. The officer said that he didn't hear the reply and mentioned that his colleague said she was going back inside to speak to other officers. Constable Gibson said that he approached Mr. Elliott and realised that the tripod had a phone on top which was pointing in the direction of his car. The officer said that he asked Mr. Elliott what he was doing, and he responded that he was obtaining footage for his websites. Gibson said that he asked Mr. Elliott if he had any permission, and he responded that he didn't need it. The officer said that with each answer, Mr. Elliott was getting more arrogant. If you haven't seen the videos, please go and have a look. Links are in the description. Please let me know if you think I was being arrogant or whether you think I was simply standing my ground and explaining that I did not need permission to be there. Let me know what you think in the comments. The officer said that it was at this point he realised that Mr. Elliott was facing the camera towards him, having picked the tripod up. Constable Gibson said that he started to feel anxious with the realisation that there was a male who he didn't know or what his intentions were, who had footage of himself, his car and registration on his device. The officer said that he found this deeply unnerving, especially with the knowledge of the current threat of terrorism throughout the UK and Mr. Elliott providing no reasonable explanation as to why he was there. If you find that unnerving, officer, then maybe you should find another job. Maybe teaching, well, no, not teaching, or maybe being a cleaner in a kindergarten school. Maybe that would be less intimidating for you. Absolute cunt. Gibson said that a few moments later, officers attended and spoke to Mr. Elliott. Constable Barker completed an evidential statement. Thank you for making sure that that's an evidential statement regarding this incident, and explained that she was leaving work with her colleague Gibson, and as she got to her vehicle noticed Mr. Elliott dressed in dark clothing with his hood up, pointing the camera phone on a tripod into the car park. The officer said that the phone appeared to be facing her vehicle. Constable Barker said that she was not happy to leave for home at this point, as she was concerned regarding Mr. Elliott's presence and behaviour, as it did not appear to be normal. The officer said that she got out and asked him what he was doing, and he replied that he was filming police vehicles to get stock footage. Constable Barker said that she felt very uneasy that Mr. Elliott appeared to have filmed her and her vehicle. The officer said that she worked for over 10 years in Special Branch and is fully aware of security concerns surrounding places such as police stations and police officers, and of the current threat of terrorism in the UK. 10 years in Special Branch, but you pissed your knickers over one single person with a camera. Constable Barker said that she approached two colleagues in a marked police vehicle and explained that she felt anxious and worried that Mr. Elliott may have recorded her private registration and also her when she was speaking to him. Constable Barker said that the officers went to speak to Mr. Elliott. Mr. Elliott makes regular posts on YouTube under the banner Police Abusing Powers, where he expresses his own personal views of policing in general and the rights of the individual. The language he uses is not always constructive. Or maybe if the behaviour of your police officers was a bit more better, then maybe the language used would be a bit more constructive. Mr. Elliott has posted a number of clips relating to this incident. Some relate to comments and updates regarding his arrest and treatment, and comments on policing in general. There were 4 clips taken on the night, which is summarised as follows. Clip 1. Constable 8325 Marshall approaches the station in a police vehicle and questions Mr. Elliott about his purpose. The officer asks for Mr. Elliott's name and address. Asks for Mr. Elliott's name and he refuses. The officer asks for an incident log to be created and explains to Mr. Elliott that it is not the question of police vehicles leaving, but officers' personal vehicles. Mr. Elliott explains that it's stock footage for his website or for sale, and explains that he builds websites for a hobby. Constable Marshall mentions his concern about police officers' private vehicles being filmed and being passed on to organised crime groups. The officer explains that he will speak to his supervisor and seek advice. It is clear that there is antagonism between the two, and Mr. Elliott makes a derogatory remark outside the hearing of Constable Marshall. For avoidance of doubt, and for your information, viewers, the derogatory remark was, "What a fucking plank." What a fucking plank. That's the remark. Okay? Meaning, what an idiot. What a fucking idiot. Because that is my opinion of PC Marshall. He was a fucking idiot. Nothing wrong with that. I'm allowed to use whatever language I want to describe whatever I want. And there's fuck all anyone can do about it. Constable Marshall speaks to his supervisor, and following a further conversation between the officer and Mr. Elliott, Marshall leaves, saying that he will not be doing anything further. Video 2, nothing of note, which is what I said at the beginning or a bit earlier on. Video 3, Constable Hunt challenges Mr. Elliott, who explains that he has previously spoken to an officer. Mr. Elliott explains his presence and that there is nothing sinister in what he is doing. Hunt drives off and Mr. Elliott comments how he felt that the officer had acted correctly in a way he dealt with him. A number of officers began to leave the building and one passes in their private vehicle. Constable Gibson and Constable Barker approached their vehicles and before getting in challenged Mr. Elliott about his purpose, and he explains. Constable Gibson explains that he did not feel it was appropriate in the current climate of terrorism and says that he doesn't think it could be done. Well, Gibson, what you feel and what you think have no bearing on the law. So, you know, maybe you should keep your feelings and your thoughts to yourself and just, as a police officer, concentrate on enforcing the actual law. Hunt and Thompson are flagged down and Hunt approaches Mr. Elliott and says that he does not feel it appropriate for registration plates of officers and police vehicles to be filmed. This goes to show you how, you know, how policing is all based on opinion and not based on factual evidence, okay? I've already been told by, as it says in this PSD report, I was already told by PC Marshall that it's not a case of filming, you know, police vehicles. That's not an issue. It's the personal vehicles, but yet Hunt comes along and says that, you know, it's not appropriate to be taking films of police vehicle registrations. So how can one police officer say it's okay and another police officer say it's not? Hence the fact that police officers base what they do on how they feel at the time. The officer asks Mr. Elliott for his name and he refuses, saying he is politely declining. Hunt asks Mr. Elliott why he won't give his details and says that he believes that it is suspicious that he won't. The officer is shining a light towards the camera of Mr. Elliott in order to interfere with the recording. Mr. Elliott asks for the collar numbers of Hunt and Thompson and they are provided. Thompson explains to Mr. Elliott that if he provided his details they can check him out and explains that he can't do that. The officer again asks Mr. Elliott why he's filming police cars and personal vehicles and he says it is not recording personal vehicles. It is then established that Mr. Elliott is not press and calls himself a public photographer. Well, it doesn't matter if I'm press, if I'm an independent journalist, you know, whether I'm a self-employed reporter or whether I'm a fucking ice cream van driver. It makes no fucking difference. If I want to take photos, I'll take photos. Constable Hunt explains that there have been complaints about the recording and mentions the heightened state of terrorism and hostile reconnaissance. Mr. Elliott challenges the officer's belief and there follows a discussion about the Terrorism Act. Right, if you've seen the videos, go and have a look at video number 3 if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it, go and have another look. Hunt turns round and says about the Terrorism Act. I then ask him which section of the Terrorism Act. Hunt then turns round and says section 44 of the Terrorism Act. I just so happen to know and knew at the time that section 44 was no longer in existence. It was repealed, I think 2012, maybe 2010. Can't remember the exact date, but it was repealed because it infringed on people's human rights. And when I questioned him about it, he said that he doesn't need reasonable suspicion under section 44 of the Terrorism Act to demand my details off me. And even when I said that section 44 was repealed, he argued that it wasn't. Very interesting that it doesn't say anything about that in this PSD report. Mr. Elliott challenges the officer's belief and there follows a discussion about the Terrorism Act. Hunt says that the issue could be resolved if Mr. Elliott explained himself better and asks if there's anything that he can do to assist. Williams joins them and speaks to Mr. Elliott. Well, I did explain why I was there. I explained multiple times why I was there. Just because I didn't want to give my details and end up on a police database or have them poking around in my past, that's my right. I didn't even have to tell them what I was doing. That is also my right. But I did. And this goes to show that it doesn't matter what you do. If the police are in a bad mood, if the police have a perception of you, or if you argue with the police, they're going to fucking nick you anyway. Video 4. Constable Williams questions Mr. Elliott, who repeats his earlier explanation. Well, at least it's nice to see that, you know, I've been consistent throughout. Not so much can be said about these police officers, but there we go. Constable Hunt asks if he can help to get the footage of Mr. Elliott, and Mr. Elliott explains how that would not be possible until police vehicles go to an emergency. Mr. Elliott explains himself again, and Constable Williams explains that because of his presence and the officers are not happy and are worried, so are using a different exit to leave the building. Williams explains that under Section 50 Police Reform Act, he requires Mr. Elliott's details and that if he refuses, he will be arrested. Thompson and Hunt explain that if Mr. Elliott provides his details, it can be established if he is a threat to the police. Mr. Elliott then reads through documentary legislation he has with him to check that what he is being told is correct and queries how he is causing antisocial behaviour. Inspector Higham can be heard asking Mr. Elliott if he has any permission to film. Inspector Higham confirms that police cannot stop people filming but want to prevent a public causing annoyance. The officer explains to Mr. Elliott that he is causing annoyance and committing an offence by failing to provide his name and address. Mr. Elliott is questioned again about being asked for permission, then responds that he does not need permission to film from a public place into a private one. So he already says here, Inspector Higham asks me if I had permission. I said I don't need it. He confirms that I don't need it, basically by saying that he cannot stop members of the public filming. But yet he asks me yet again, directly after that, if I have permission, when he knows that I don't need permission. Mr. Elliott is told by Inspector Higham that unless he provides his details, he will be arrested. Thompson asks Mr. Elliott for his name and address, saying that the legislation has been explained. Mr. Elliott did not provide these details and he was arrested. The available body-worn video of Constable Hunt and Constable Williams is consistent with clips 3 and 4 of the YouTube footage, which is summarised above. During the recordings, Mr. Elliott explained that he had decided to record outside the police station, as earlier when he was out walking, a number of police vehicles exited the station with blue lights and sirens while he was at the junction, and it would have made good footage. Mr. Elliott explained how vehicles turned left and right at the junction of Crosby Road South and Great George's Road, and he missed this opportunity. It is not known whether Mr. Elliott considered taking stock footage from the junction to reflect the recording he had missed, but it would seem to have been a more appropriate option. Well, there was no guarantee that I was going to get that same, there was like 6 or 7 police cars come out. There's absolutely no guarantee that I was going to get that same footage. And that would have been the best footage for me to get, but it wasn't going to happen. Okay, the chances of that happening again within the time frame that I had was, thousands to one, I would imagine. Plus, police cars could have come out the back of the police station and turned left, which would have been going away from me. So the best place for me to get a shot of the police car with the lights and siren is from a public place directly outside the gates of the police station, so I could capture just a few seconds of footage, dramatic, because it was night time, everything would have lit up with the blues, okay, and that's it. Could have got that footage and disappeared, but no. But it wouldn't have mattered where I was, even if I was standing at the junction pointing down the road where the exit is, or if the police cars came up and saw me there filming, they'd have done exactly the same thing. They would have pulled over and they would have started questioning me, and I would have told them they're not getting me details, so nothing would have changed. In the UK, there are no laws forbidding photography of private property from a public place, and the evidence does not indicate that any officer actually took steps to stop Mr. Elliott from exercising this right. Guys, if you've seen the videos, I want you to let me know if you think that the police took no steps to restrict the exercising of my right to take photographs. I would really like to know if you believe that the police did nothing to... I know what I feel, but I'd like to know your opinions. If you think that the police did nothing to restrict my rights to take photographs from a public place, considering that just above this, what I've just read, it says that Hunt shone his torch into my camera to interfere with what I was recording. So, I'd like to know if there's any more points that you've found. What was challenged was his purpose, which gave cause for concern, and he was asked for his name and address, which was perfectly reasonable under the circumstances. There is a wealth of guidance in the public domain relating to public photography, which generally explains that if filming is questioned by a police officer, explain calmly and politely what you are doing and cooperate. If filming upsets someone, try to calm the situation down, and if necessary, stop, unless there is good reason for not doing so. Very quickly, if somebody gets upset with you filming them, there's nothing the police can do, by the way. Okay, providing you're not harassing, as in following them around and filming them, then the police can't do nothing about it. Quite simple. It actually says in the ACPO, I think it is, or the Met Police photography memo, if a member of the public complains about being filmed and ask the police, complains to the police about being filmed, the police can ask the photographer to not do it, but cannot enforce it. That's what it says. So that's that one out the window. Second one is, I've seen some documentation online saying that you should be cooperative, but 99% of the documentation online, even from photography professionals' websites or forums, it does say to be polite, yes, but being polite doesn't mean giving up your rights. So there is more information out there that says don't engage with the police. Don't give them your details if you don't need to, which you didn't. And also to record your interaction, because of the amount of people that have been arrested falsely or accused falsely for photography. Section 50 of the Police Reform Act 2002 empowers a constable to require the name and address of a person engaged in antisocial behaviour. Where that person fails to give their name and address, or the name of an address is false or inaccurate, he commits an offence. Antisocial behaviour is defined in the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act 2014 as conduct that has caused or is likely to cause harassment, alarm and distress to any person. Conduct capable of causing nuisance or annoyance to a person in relation to that person's occupation of residential premises, or conduct capable of causing housing related nuisance or annoyance to any person. And something else has just jumped out at me there as well. Unbelievable. Gibson and Barker felt sufficiently concerned by the behaviour of Mr. Elliott that, rather than leave the station and go home, they remained and raised their concerns with Hunt and Thompson. These officers challenged Mr. Elliott, who had previously been spoken to. However, the difference on this occasion was that individual officers were now complaining about having their personal vehicles recorded. This would seem to be a valid concern, as Mr. Elliott has posted this incident online, showing police officer private vehicle registration plates. Mr. Elliott had explained on his YouTube footage that this was not his purpose, but he has since posted the footage in full. Well, the reason the video has been posted in full is so that it's tamper-proof, really, so that you can't do anything with it, okay, and I can't do it. I've still got the originals, but the originals were uploaded directly from my device, and everything in it is as it occurred. There was no edits, there was no cuts, nothing, so that people can see what happened. Had you not approached me, and had you not tried to threaten and intimidate me, then the footage wouldn't have gone up. There would be, you know, I would have got my footage of the police car leaving the station, I'd have gone home, had a cup of tea, gone to bed. Job done, right? The reason, and only reason this footage was put up onto YouTube is because of your piss poor performance in dealing with a member of the public. During the YouTube recordings, Mr. Elliott explained that he had decided to record outside the police station, as earlier, when he was out walking, a number of police vehicles exited the station with blue lights and sirens while he was at the junction, and it would have made a good footage. Mr. Elliott explains how vehicles turn left and right at the junction of Crosby Road South and Great George's Street, and he missed this opportunity. It is not known whether Mr. Elliott considered taking stock footage from the junction to reflect the recording he had missed, but it would seem to have been a more appropriate option to replicate the shot he missed. As I said just now, there was no guarantee that I was going to get that shot. None at all. And as I didn't want to be out all night, I thought I'd go and stand at the back of the police station, get a shot of a police car coming out, right? Because that would have been a guaranteed shot. There was definitely a police car coming out there at some point, which there was. Could have got that shot and then gone home. It's quite simple, really. Police officers, like any other individual, have a right to a private life. Yes, when they're at home, maybe. Not when you're out in public. And what Mr. Elliott failed to appreciate is the additional risks that police officers face from the criminal element. Okay, so how many... Let's have this right. In Liverpool, over the past month, there's probably been about 7 stabbings or more, some shootings, okay, and not a single one of them has been at police. Okay, in fact, I don't recall any news since I've lived in Liverpool, 12 years or so. Now, I may have missed some, but I don't recall any news of any police officers being followed home and fucking attacked. Yes, of course it can happen. It can happen to anybody. Somebody could see a member of the public leaving a police station and assume that they are a police officer. So what do we do? Do you know what I mean? Just because you're a police officer doesn't mean that you go out of the police only door, you know, that's marked police only, no exit, you know, police personnel only, no exit by members of the public. Do you know what I mean? So the police can quite easily leave via a public entrance, okay? And nobody's going to know whether they're police or civilians. On the other hand, nobody's going to know whether a civilian is a civilian or a police officer. So that makes no fucking sense at all. It is not unknown for police officers to be personally targeted at their home addresses, and this is why officers are advised to travel to and from work in civilian uniform rather than half blues. The officers tried to identify Mr. Elliott in order to establish if he posed any risk. There does not appear to be any real reason for his failure to provide his name and address other than the fact that he didn't want to cooperate. The guidance regarding filming suggests that cooperation is a sensible choice for public photography filming, but unfortunately Mr. Elliott did not follow this approach. Yet again, that is not the advice of photography experts, if you like, or amateur photographers, or anybody that's into photography. That is not the advice. That is the advice from you. So you can get people's details and add it to intelligence and use it to intimidate. Solicitors and photographers alike say, don't give your details. It's quite simple. Mr. Elliott was legally required to provide his name and address and chose not to do so. He was fully aware of the consequences, and the considered option would have been to submit to the request. The fact that he didn't lead to this lawful arrest. This complaint is not upheld on the basis that, on a balance of probabilities, check this out guys, this complaint is not upheld on the basis that, on the balance of probabilities, there is no evidence to support this complaint allegation. So nothing to do with the actual evidence, nothing to do with based on proof and evidence. This is based on the balance of probabilities. I mean, are they sitting there flipping a coin and going, right, heads we uphold it, tails we don't uphold it? Flip. Yeah, this one goes in the fucking trash. Do you know what I mean? Is that what they're doing here? How can you run an investigation, you know, looking for crimes that have been committed based on probabilities? Fuck's sake. Second complaint, other assault. Mr. Elliott believes that he was subjected to excessive, unnecessary and disproportionate force, specifically the application of the handcuffs. Hunt explained that once he arrested Mr. Elliott, he took hold of his right wrist while Williams took his left. The officer explains that Mr. Elliott tensed his arm and shouted words to the effect of, "What are you doing?" in an agitated manner. Guys, go and have a look at the videos. Video 4, you don't need to watch them all if you don't want to. Video 4, where I get arrested, have a look. You can see I'm not pulling away, I'm not doing anything to resist. My arm was twisted. When your arm's twisted, you can't bend it apart from one way, which is why they do it. They twist it so that the only way your arm can bend is down behind you. So how was I resisting? Do you know what I mean? My arm was twisted, for fuck's sake. I mean, yes, when somebody grabs your arm and twists it like that to a point where it's painful, your natural reaction, and it's not a cognitive reaction, this is a reaction that your body does purposely, okay, and that is to tense a little bit to stop it from being twisted all the way. Do you know what I mean? But that's an involuntary action. Hunt explains that as Mr. Elliott was unknown to him and was stocky in stature, he believed that he was a threat to himself and his colleagues. Yes, 8 police officers and me. Well done. The officer explained that he handcuffed Mr. Elliott to the rear in the stacked position at the correct application site as per the Home Office approved training he has received. The officer explained that the fit of the handcuffs were checked and double locked to prevent further tightening. Hunt explained that Mr. Elliott was conveyed to Wirral Custody Suite, and when they arrived he asked that the handcuffs were left on so the custody officer could see the position and he was in pain. The officer explained that he recorded the position of the handcuffs on body-worn video whilst checking a fit by placing a finger between the cuff and wrists on both hands. The officer commented that the fit was adequate and had not changed. Why do you think I asked the custody sergeant to have a look? I asked the custody sergeant to have a look, okay, so that it would be recorded, so that there was an independent, if you like, and I know they all work together, but it would have been somebody who wasn't involved in the arrest, who wasn't involved in the confrontation or the incident. It would have been a fresh pair of eyes looking at the handcuffs on me to see that they were incorrectly used, okay, and causing me pain. But no, of course, that's not going to happen because Hunt knows that it would have been seen that they were incorrectly used. So we took them off. You can even see in the video, I've got a subject access request, which I've done. I've got the videos on here as well, so I'll link them in the description. Where I go into custody suite, you can see that when he takes the handcuffs off me, I can't even take my hand out of the handcuff. The handcuff latch comes open, so it's just there. It's just around that part of your wrist, and I couldn't even get my hand out. That's how tight they were. I could not get my hand out, and that was whilst being helped by Hunt. So, do you know what I mean? Williams explained that Hunt placed a handcuff to Mr. Elliott's right wrist at the correct application site, and on doing so, Mr. Elliott started to tense up and was agitated. Just a quick note here, guys. If you have a look, I was only agitated because of how my arms were twisted. It hurt. Okay, it actually hurt. Up until that point, I wasn't agitated. I found it funny, to be honest, that all of these police officers were there for little old me, okay, trying to get some footage, and that was it. I'd already explained to a dozen police officers why I was there. I knew at that point, because I was going to stand my ground, I knew that you know, it was going to happen. I knew that they were going to arrest me. They wanted to arrest me. Okay. So I knew that the cuffs were going on, or at least I knew I was going to get arrested. I didn't know that I was going to get cuffed because I hadn't shown any indication of violence or aggression. But yeah, I knew that was happening. There was no reason for me to resist. Absolutely no reason for me to resist at all, because as far as I was concerned, they'd already breached some of their own professional standards, okay, in using things like Section 44 and you know, the rest of it. So that what would have been the reason for me to resist at that point? Because that just would have looked bad on me. Do you know what I mean? How could I have said, hang on a minute, you've done this, that and the other, without them turning around and saying, yeah, but you fought back, or you did this and you did that. And I didn't. Absolutely didn't. And you'll see it in the footage. I'm telling you, you'll see it in the footage. The officer said that as he did not know anything about Mr. Elliott, who was of large build and strong, that's an assumption, so he took hold of his left arm. Bearing in mind that Williams was taller than me, he's broader than me. I'm just a short little fat bloke, me. Do you know what I mean? Williams was way taller than me, and you know, he was broad. Hunt was big. He was bigger than me. He was a lot wider than I am. You know, I wouldn't have been able, if Williams had put me on the floor and sat on me, there's no way I'd have got out of that. I'm telling you, I just haven't got the strength to do that. But there we go. The officer said that he placed Mr. Elliott's arm behind his back, at the same time felt Mr. Elliott tense up and resist. The officer explained that the other handcuff was applied to the correct application site. When Williams took my arm, again, please go and have a look at subject access request video in the link, in the description below. The link is. As you watch that, you'll see how Constable Williams twists my arm so that my elbow is up above my shoulder, which I can't do on my own. All right, up above my shoulder. Then he puts his arm here, or his hand here, okay, and then pushes on my elbow and pushes me down. That's not just taking my arm and putting it in a handcuff. Sergeant Green commented that the force used was reasonable in his mind, and this whole episode was brought on by Mr. Elliott attending a police station for no reason other than to cause issues. Now there's absolutely, what's he backing that up with? He's got nothing to back that up with. I was there for perfectly legitimate reason. I told every single police officer more than once why I was there. Every police officer that attended, I told them at least two times why I was there, which I didn't have to, but I did. The body-worn video of Hunt shows limited detail regarding the arrest due to the position of the camera, but it does document the officers mention that Mr. Elliott is tensing up and asking him to stop doing so. It's Cop School 101, that is. We all know that when the police put hands on somebody, the first thing that they do, and they never just say it, they never just say, look, come on, stop tensing. They always shout it so that other people around can hear. Okay, now what that does is a psychological thing. Okay, if people cannot see what's actually going on, but they hear something, they will automatically assume that it's true. For example, if you're round a corner and there's people around the other side and you shout out, look out, he's got a knife. Look out, he's got a knife. Look out, he's got a knife. And then the police turn up. Nearly everybody that was round the corner that wasn't actually there looking will turn around and say, yeah, I think he had a knife. Yeah, he said he had a knife. He had a knife. This is a psychological thing. This is how the police work. This is their tactics, people, okay? 9 times out of 10, people that are getting arrested are not resisting. In my opinion, 9 times out of 10. If it's not that high, then there is still a lot of people that do not resist when they're arrested. It's a natural bodily reaction to tense up. You cannot do, when you're put into a stress position or a position that hurts, it's your body's natural reaction to try and counter that pain. And there's nothing you can do about it. Absolutely nothing. But it makes you, as the person being handcuffed, appear to be fighting back. Right, Mr. Elliott's arms are placed behind his back and he is handcuffed. It shows that the handcuffs are double locked. Mr. Elliott complains about his arms being twisted behind his back, and it is explained to him that he was tensing up, which he disputes. Have a look at the videos, man, honestly. There is further body-worn video in custody that records a handcuff position and Constable Hunt checking a fit by placing a finger between the cuff and the wrists. There is further recording showing handcuff indentation marks on both wrists of Mr. Elliott. The marks confirm that the handcuffs were correctly sighted on the wrists. Custody record shows that at 0003 hours, Sergeant 1744 Clinch requests a medical professional to note any injury to Mr. Elliott, who complained of indentations to his wrists from the handcuffs. At 0052 hours, so 50 minutes later, Mr. Elliott was examined by healthcare practitioner 82983 Ashton. No injury was noted. Any intentional use of force on another person is assault. No shit, Sherlock. The use of handcuffs is an assault and it is unlawful unless it can be justified. This justification is achieved by establishing not only a legal right to use handcuffs, but also good objective grounds for doing so, in order to establish that what the police officer did was reasonable use of force. That next paragraph is just the Police Chief Counsel's guidance on using handcuffs. Mr. Elliott has not provided evidence that he sustained any injury, and when he was examined by a healthcare practitioner, McMahon, no injury was noted. Well, the reason I didn't provide any evidence that I sustained an injury is because I thought I already had. When I was in a cell and the healthcare practitioner came in and examined my wrists, and Hunt took photos of my wrists in custody, that, as far as I was concerned, that was my evidence of injury. Nobody told me that it was not being noted as an injury. Nobody told me that. As far as I was concerned, healthcare practitioner came in, she looked at my wrists, she went out, and that was it. I thought, okay, she's gone in and she's going to go and tell them that yes, there's marks on my wrists, and in fact, I actually had blister. There was a blister on my fucking hand, or on my wrist, from the handcuffs. A blister. Not just a red mark or an indentation, an actual blister. Handcuffs are a form of restraint and by their very nature are not designed to be comfortable. The body-worn video shows that the handcuffs were correctly applied and the indentations caused to the wrists perfectly normal. It is not unusual to sustain soft tissue injury, such as bruising from being handcuffed, but this is not evidence of excessive force. Constable Hunt explained that he did not know the nature of Mr. Elliott and described him as strong in stature. Again, that's just another assumption. Both Constable Hunt and Constable Williams described Mr. Elliott as tensing up, of course. The explanation provided by the officers is in accordance with MPCC guidelines when applying handcuffs. The officers' actions are reasonable and proportionate in the circumstances, and there is no evidence that they were excessive. Okay, this complaint is not upheld, surprise, surprise, on the basis that, on the balance of probabilities again. So no facts, no evidence, just, on the balance of probabilities. There is no evidence to support this complaint allegation. Recommendations, allegation 1 not upheld, allegation 2 not upheld. Following a local investigation into these complaints, it is apparent that Hunt and Williams have acted correctly. Consequently, there are no recommendations arising from the investigation of this complaint. And that's it, guys. That is it. That is their response to my complaint for being arrested for taking photographs in a public place. Now, again, if you've already watched the footage and you can remember it in your mind, I'd like to know your thoughts, please. Again, I can't get into a discussion. I will converse with you, absolutely, as I always do, but I can't get into a discussion as to, whether what you say is what I've already put in my letter or anything like that. I have to keep that to myself at the moment, guys, okay? Because that's, it's going in as a counter to this pathetic excuse of an investigation that seems to me like it's only based almost solely on what the officers have said, okay, rather than what's actually evidenced on footage. So there we go, guys. I'm sorry this is such a long video, but again, I told everybody that I would keep you updated. This is an update. As soon as I know any more, I'll get back to you and let you know. But thank you once again for watching. Thank you again for being a subscriber. If you haven't subscribed already, please click the subscribe link. Also, if you haven't heard about the GoFundMe campaign for the audit team, there's a link to that in the description as well. The audit team, where a group of us, calm, professional, knowledgeable, we hope, individuals are looking to try and provide some backup to people who may have been mistreated by overzealous security, police abusing their powers, not me, I mean actual police abusing their powers, or other officials who have infringed on your rights. More information on that can be found by clicking that link below for the GoFundMe campaign. And for those of you who already have given, I cannot thank you enough from me and the team. It's incredibly kind of you. Thank you. So that's it for now, and until next time.
Good night, all.